Hello, everyone. Hi, and I welcome you all. Hi, this is Aprajita. So, on behalf of the Animal Save movement, I'd like to welcome you all today in this webinar. I'd like, I think most of us have gathered here today because we are concerned about what's happening around us, and we are asking ourselves what we can do about the challenges we are facing. So most of us have a very unclear understanding about what's going on, and we have had a hard time finding out the correct information because so much is out there, and it can seem a bit overwhelming. So to help us connect these dots, Youth Climate Save has asked Jeeva Bhavana to partner together and create this webinar. So Jeeva Bhavana is a solution-based environmental NGO from India. So today's presentation will aim is to give us a clarity about the crisis we are facing and to empower you with the truth. And during this presentation, Julie from Jeeva Bhavana will ask you for your participation. And so we please type your thoughts in the sections, and yeah, you can ask any question, whatever comes to your mind. Yeah. So we are going to talk about a very serious issue here about life. How do we save life on this planet? So the first part of the presentation will be quite serious because we must know the truth, and if we want to really find a solution. But rest assured, there are solutions that everyone here can take part in. So I will give over to you, Julie.
Great, thank you, Aprajita. So I'm going to share my screen, and it might take a couple of seconds to get this all running. So excuse me for taking this little time. And okay, so can everybody see the screen?
Not yet.
No.
Yes, yes.
Yes? Okay, great. So thank you very much, Aprajita, and thank you to the SAVE movement for inviting Jeeva Bhavana to partner with you on this for these webinars. We're just really, really happy to be here and to be able to give a short overview of the climate crisis and the environmental crisis that we are living through today, because as Madhavi will explain a little bit later, Jeeva Bhavana is a solutions-based NGO. So our goal in giving you this information is really to empower you with the truth and to propose solutions that we can all take part in. So with that, I'm going to start with a question. And the question is, what do we mean when we say climate change? So we're going to be seeing this webinar that there are many words that we use, phrases that we use, but we don't always really know what they mean. We've just gotten used to using them. So basically, what is climate change? Well, what it means is unfortunately, is droughts and floods and extreme and more frequent weather phenomena. So that's what climate change really is, what it really means. Now, climate change is, in a nutshell, it is caused by global warming. And in another nutshell, global warming is caused by greenhouse gas emissions. So most of us, when we hear greenhouse gases, we think of one of them, which is CO2 or carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is definitely a problem, and we're going to speak about it. But there are also other greenhouse gases that we emit and that we don't talk about as much, and we'll talk about those as well. So what's really the most important thing to remember is that when we speak of climate change, we're actually, oftentimes we speak of climate change and of global warming in this interchangeably. But really, it's the greenhouse gas emissions that drive the global warming that actually is the main cause of climate change. So another question is, what are greenhouse gases? And well, to know greenhouse gases, why we call them greenhouse gases, here's a little image that I'd like to show to you. Now, many of us have seen greenhouses before, and a greenhouse is just a building, usually with glass walls, and it's used to grow oftentimes plants, right? And what happens is that the sun rays hit the glass of the house and of the greenhouse, and the sun rays penetrate. And actually, the glass makes it so that the heat stays trapped within the greenhouse. So you can have these temperatures that are very, very high and that are conducive to growing many plants. Now, if we think that that between the walls, the glass walls, and the earth in this photo, that's what is the atmosphere. That's what we can call that, the atmosphere. So what happens is the sun's rays hit the walls of the atmosphere, right? The layers of the atmosphere, penetrate into the atmosphere, hit the earth. But now when we, and that's really important because we need to have some heat on the earth. We have greenhouse gases that actually create this heat. What they are gases that stay in the atmosphere that trap the heat from the sun's rays so that it stays in the atmosphere and that it basically makes it a livable planet for us. Now, today, just this morning, I read something about that right now we live in a Goldilocks climate. So for all of those people who know the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, the idea is that right now it's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right. However, what we're doing is we are emitting these gases that are creating more and more heat that's being trapped within the atmosphere, and that's heating up the atmosphere and thus giving rise to global warming. So now that we know what the greenhouse effect is, we can go further and ask ourselves, what is environmental breakdown? When we talk about this environmental breakdown, what do we mean by it? Well, basically, it is the depletion of our natural resources like air, water, soil, pollution, and pollution. And it's also not just the depletion of the resources, but it's also the decreasing quality of these resources. So we have our air that we're breathing is just it's not getting better, it's actually getting worse. The same thing with the water and our soils. These are the quality of all these natural resources is actually decreasing. Environmental breakdown also means the destruction of our ecosystems. And ecosystems are basically just the total web of life in a particular area. And the destruction of ecosystems is also gives rise to habitat destruction and wildlife extinction and all sorts of other very, very tragic things that we are living through today. Now, the last question I want to ask you is, what is a pandemic? Now, we've all been here for the last year in our homes, in lockdown, semi-lockdown, total lockdown, wearing masks, and because of this new pandemic, which is called COVID-19. But what is a pandemic, actually? So before we want to talk about a pandemic, we have to know what an epidemic is. And an epidemic is just an outbreak of a disease that quickly infects a large number of people. That's all it is. Now, a pandemic is when the disease is spread from person to person throughout the world. That's what we've seen with COVID-19, is that it wasn't just in one area of the world, in one country, it just went to every corner of the world. Now, the disease that causes the epidemic can be passed from person to person, or it can be carried from people by something that is non-human, for example, insects or infected water. Excuse me. But now scientists are actually stating that more than 70% of all pandemics have their source in animals. These are what we call zoonotic diseases. And that means that the disease actually originates in animals and then is transmitted to humans, where it becomes an actual disease or can become a pandemic, because the disease has mutated or altered. So what the disease actually, when it was in an animal, it was not dangerous for humans. But when that alters and humans do catch this disease, it can cause a pandemic. That's a zoonotic disease. So here's my question, and this I'd really love you to write down your answers. I'd like to ask you this question. What do pandemics, climate change, and environmental breakdown have in common? And I'll give you about 10, 15 seconds. Please, if you're here with us today, write down your comments in the comment section, and give you a couple more seconds for that. And if you're ready for the response, I will tell you. So what do pandemics, climate change, and environmental breakdown have in common? Animal agriculture. Okay. So when we talk about animal agriculture, what do we mean? Well, animal agriculture is basically the raising and using of animals on land or in water as a food source. That's all it means. So it can go from, a few animals on a farm. It can be the horrible confined, the huge industrial farming operations. It can be the outdoor, what they like to call regenerative grazing. All of these types of things, it is basically animal agriculture, because all we're talking about is raising and using animals on land or in water as food source. Now, the question is, why? Why is animal agriculture so much of a driver of climate change? Well, remember just a few slides ago, we spoke about greenhouse gases leading to global warming, which in turn leads to climate change. Well, animal agriculture is responsible for more greenhouse gases than any other human activity, even more than all of the world's transportation combined, meaning cars and trains and ships and airplanes. And it's estimated that more than 50% of greenhouse gases come from animal agriculture. Now, that number is, there are some people, a very eminent scholar who we are influenced by, who says this number is almost 90%. But let's go with 50%, which is just a huge number when we think that 50% of our greenhouse gases that we're producing now comes from agriculture. Now, why is that? Well, one of the reasons is that, let's talk about CO2 again, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is produced in a number of ways in animal agriculture. For example, we need to grow a tremendous number of crops to feed all of the animals that we are raising. And these crops are high energy crops like corn, and they require lots and lots of chemical fertilizers, which need a lot of fossil fuels to make. So already we need all of these fossil fuels, and we'll get to fossil fuels in a little while, but we need all of these fossil fuels in order to create the chemical fertilizers that we're going to use to grow these very high energy crops to feed animals. But it's also used, CO2 is also emitted because we're fueling all of these huge farms, and we need all of the energy that we need to produce, to process and to package and to transport all of the different animal projects. Now, we tend to focus on CO2 because that's the greenhouse gas that is the most volume in the atmosphere. But animal agriculture, emits many other greenhouse gases, and some of which are actually much more potent than CO2. So I'd like to just pause and talk for just a couple of seconds about methane. This is another greenhouse gas, and methane is basically produced by ruminant animals. So ruminant animal is basically an animal that has two stomachs. So that means cows and sheep and goats. And it's a gas that is naturally produced in their digestive system. So that means that when they digest their food, the gas is released by burps or flatulence, or some people like to call them cow farts. And it's also in the dung that they produce. So this, they can't help it. I mean, this is the way their bodies are designed. They have these two stomachs, and this is, and methane is just naturally produced. There's no way to get around that fact. Now, let's just think for 1 second. We don't have to be mathematicians to understand that there are close to 1 billion cattle meaning cows and bulls, in the world today. Close to 1 billion. Now, all of these 1 billion cattle, and I'm just talking about the cows and the bulls, I'm not talking about the sheep or the goats, they produce every day. They are burping, and they are they're farting, and they producing a lot of dung. That's a tremendous amount of methane. So as a matter of fact, 40% of all of the methane emissions comes from animal agriculture. Now, in the atmosphere, the actual quantity of methane is much less than CO2. But here's the catch. Methane is about 80 times more powerful than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. That means that there's an 80 times warming potential that is much greater with methane than with CO2, for example. Now, on the other side, and I don't want to get too much into it because we have a lot more to cover, but the good news is that if we stop animal agriculture, that methane just stops, right? We don't have all of that 40% of the methane that is actually being produced. Now, climate change is on one side of the coin, but the other one is the environmental breakdown that we spoke about just a short while ago. Now, this environmental breakdown, in other words, the drought, all of the pollution and the decreasing quality of our air and our soil and our water and habitat loss and all of these other things come from many different sources within animal agriculture, and one of them is the waste that they produce. So the waste doesn't just produce methane, but it also contaminates soils and waters, and in our water, and it leads to something called eutrophication, which basically means that there's so much nutrients in the waste, right? It's everything the cow or the other animals has not digested into their system. So all of this waste is running off very, very often into our waters, and it basically causes the minerals to increase in the water, and the oxygen supply is totally diminished. And so the ecosystem is negatively affected, and it causes all of these fish to die. It causes ocean dead zones and things like that. One of the other things that animal agriculture does for our environment is it causes topsoil erosion, desertification, and the chemicals for the fertilizers that we need to grow the feed lead to more soil erosion and desertification. Because we need such huge amounts of these crops, we tend to do something called monocropping, which is thousands and thousands of acres with one type of crop, which is one of the things we can do to any ecosystem. So there's also the deforestation that we're going to speak about just very soon that leads to habitat destruction, biodiversity loss. There's a tremendous amount of land use, of course, because these animals take up room. They need a room. They have to live someplace. The water use, they have to drink food. They have to drink water. So we can see in this short slide just this wide gamut, this huge gamut of the environmental impact of animal agriculture. And if you just look on the right, we see that just for milk, something as simple as dairy milk compared to other plant milks, right? Plant drinks, if you will. So whether it's almond or rice or soy milk, we see that the amount of emissions that are the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, the amount of water use, the amount of land use, when we speak of something like as simple as dairy, compared to the alternatives, the plant-based alternatives, is just absolutely a no-brainer, right? Now, the other thing we spoke about was pandemics. So let's just speak, I just want to talk about this because it's really, really important. It's important for everyone to understand how all of these things are related. So why is animal agriculture related to pandemics? Well, basically, animal agriculture leads to habitat loss. right? Because we need to graze animals and we need to grow food to feed these animals. So basically we are taking away their habitat. We're usually deforesting and things like that. Now, that often means that wild animals that live in these wild forests that are now being raised to grow food or to graze domesticated animals, they come closer and closer to humans' dwellings and and domesticated animals. And so there's that chance of what we call a jump over from a wild animal, a wild animal that might be carrying some sort of a disease that won't do it any harm. But when it does come in contact with a domesticated animal or with humans, it can alter or mutate and cause a zoonotic disease, basically. And then there's things like the antibiotics that we are giving to all of these domesticated animals. That means that when we eat these animals, we are eating basically the antibiotics, which means that we no longer can fight against many of the diseases because we are also eating their antibiotics, and we have what's called antibiotic or antimicrobial resistance. And then there's the intensive animal agriculture, because what basically happens is that when we have these big farms with many, many animals, we have to remember that most of these animals are almost carbon copies of one another. They're almost clones, as close to a clone as you can have it, because they're all artificially inseminated. So they basically are almost the same thing. So if you have one in a big factory farm, for example, if you have one animal that catches one of these diseases, like swine flu or bird flu or any of these types of diseases, then it's so easy for all of the other ones to catch them, right? Because they pass it amongst themselves like a bomb, basically. So animal waste also, it carries bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella that ultimately contaminate the land and especially water. And it's one of the main causes of another zoonotic disease and other pandemics, which are childhood diarrhea and many debilitating diseases. So because we've spoken a tiny bit about deforestation, I want to just talk a tiny bit more about it. And it just simply means clearing forests, either by burning or by cutting down trees. And there are numbers of reasons that we do this. There's numbers of reasons that we deforest. Of course, it's for mining and industry and infrastructure. But the very, very, very biggest culprit is agriculture, and especially animal agriculture. Now, deforestation is doubly harmful. It's very, very harmful. But let's talk about the two reasons that it's particularly harmful. One of them is because trees are Mother Nature's natural way of sequestering carbon. And what they do is they capture it in their leaves and they send it down to their branches, trunks, and roots, where the carbon stays basically forever if we let it there. So when we destroy trees, we destroy nature's best tool to capture carbon emissions, the CO2 that we are emitting in the atmosphere. So when we burn trees also, we emit tremendous amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere. So here we're talking about like this combined, destruction. But deforestation also leads to habitat destruction, loss of biodiversity, and both of these things are very necessary for thriving ecosystems. And it also provokes these zoonotic diseases, which may cause a pandemic, as we've spoken about in our last slide. Now, I just wanted to talk very, very briefly about the life of our oceans, because when we do these webinars, we tend to talk really about what's going on our land, and we don't spend enough time talking about our oceans. But oceans are basically the lifeblood of our planet Earth and humankind. And they produce more than half of the oxygen in the atmosphere. And that oxygen is really what we need to breathe, right? But they also absorb the most carbon. And they hold 97% of all of Earth's water. And our oceans are dying. And we cannot talk about the problems that we're confronting on our Earth unless we also pay attention to the threat to our oceans. So why are our oceans dying? There are many reasons, but I'd like to just point out these three main reasons. The first one is overfishing. Now, humans are fishing and consuming amounts of fish so high that the reproduction rate is falling way behind. More and more species are listed as endangered or are actually becoming extinct. And we're heading towards a time in the very near future of nearly empty oceans. And not only are we overfishing, but when fish is caught in large nets, large animals, including dolphins and turtles and sharks, all of these animals that we're not intending to fish, that we're not intending to eat, are also getting caught in these nets, and they're not surviving. This is called bycatch. And I just want to tell you that, because I hate to say this, but 40% of what is caught in today in the nets, in trawling, and all of these other ways that we're fishing, 40% is bycatch. So that's nearly half of everything that we're taking out of the ocean that is just gratuitous. I mean, it's all gratuitous if you would like to know my opinion, but it's particularly because they're not even aimed, they're not even, we're not meaning to do it, but we do it because of the methods that we are employing. The second reason is pollution. Now, about 80% of all of the pollution in the ocean comes from land, and that can be plastics or solid garbage or chemicals like fertilizers and things like that. Now, excessive chemical pollution can actually cause dead zones, as we saw before, where no more marine life exists. And of the plastic waste in the ocean, about 50% is abandoned fishing nets. So these nets, they pollute, of course, by their plastic content, but they also continue, even if they're just at the bottom of the ocean or something like that, they continue to trap and kill millions and millions of marine animals who get tangled up in them and can't get out. So, we've heard, let's stop using plastic straws and everything, and we're all on board about stopping to use plastic straws, and we should stop using plastic straws. But if we stop using straws, but we continue to fish, it's a bit of a contradiction. I think you would agree with me. So a lot of people believe that at our current rates, plastic waste will outweigh all of the fish in the sea before the year 2050. And the last reason I wanted to talk about is acidification. And acidification is basically because of the rising carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And what it does is it makes because the ocean, as I said, it captures carbon, but it's capturing too much carbon because we're emitting too much carbon into our atmosphere. And a lot of that is because of burning fossil fuels. And that means that there's less oxygen and less fish and coral and all types of marine life that dies out. And so I'm going to leave it over to you now for about 15 seconds. And I'd like to know what other things, other than animal agriculture, even if we admit that animal agriculture is a leading driver of so many of our problems, it's not the only one, of course. So it's to you now. Please write your answers in the chat box, in the comment section. So what are some of the other drivers that you can think of when we talk about the climate crisis, the environmental crisis that we're living through today? Okay, so let's go on. Well, we can talk about fossil fuels. So the fossil fuels, there's three types of fossil fuels: oil, gas, natural gas, and coal. And I'm not sure if anyone really knows or if you really talked about why we call them fossil fuels in the first place, but I think it's really, really interesting, and it's actually a little disturbing. So I'd like to just talk about why they are called fossil fuels. Well, it's basically that because all of these things, the oil and the gas and the coal, they're just the chemical remains of prehistoric plants and animals. All living things on Earth contain carbon, lots of it. A human being, for example, is about 18% carbon, and most plants are about close to 50% carbon. So for hundreds of millions of years, all of these plants and animals that have lived and died, they were buried under the water or on the earth, and eventually they broke down, they decomposed, and they fossilized in a certain way, and they turned into oil, natural gas, and coal. Now, about 150 years ago, humans discovered that they could turn oil gas and coal into energy or heat by burning them. Hence the word fuel in fossil fuel. Now, when we extract and burn these fuels, we get three things. We get heat, and we get water, and we get carbon dioxide, that greenhouse gas that we've spoken about. And all of that carbon stored in all of those plants and animals over hundreds of millions of years is getting pumped back into the atmosphere over just the past 150 years. Number two, and this is not a question of what is worse, what is better, what is, all of these things are a part of the climate crisis. And I really wanted to mention there's others that we're not going to get to, but I think these are things that we really need to talk about here. So plastics and waste. So this is an Indian artist whose name is Sudarshan Patanyak. And he's created all of these different beach sculptures to call our attention to plastics and to waste that we are producing in great quantities and that just do not biodegrade, so they stay here with us on Earth and in the oceans. Now, the problem with plastics is they are also a petroleum. They're also made out of fossil fuels, basically. And I read an article just a short while ago that the petrochemical industries, they know that people are moving away from fossil fuels as a source of energy because we have more and more renewable sources of energy. We have wind energy, we have solar energy. So we have all of these different types of energy that is becoming more and more cheaper and cheaper, basically. And so people are starting to really pull away from fossil fuels as a source of energy. So they're now putting all of their research development into producing plastics. Now, plastics are actually an amazing material that can be very, very useful for very specific things, like in the medical industry, things that we need to have sterilized, sterile containers and things like that. But now we see plastic and other types of waste everywhere. So, they have usually they have such a short life. They're packaging something that we're going to, maybe a bottle of water, we're going to drink the water in maybe about 5 or 10 minutes. But the plastic bottle will be here for hundreds and hundreds of years. So there's not just plastic, of course, there's the toxic waste from personal care and home care products, there's metal waste, there's electronic waste, and there's also the waste, the chemical wastes, that we emit into our atmosphere and things like that. Now, this is another thing that I think is really important, and it's called consumerism. Now, it's funny because when I was doing this webinar, I wrote consumerism, of course, and I was thinking, well, how do I really, I know what consumerism is, but what really does it mean? What does consumerism mean? So I went and I looked in a few dictionaries, and I just wanted to read to you the definition that I thought was the most interesting. And it says that consumerism is the idea that increasing the consumption of goods and services that are purchased in the market is always a desirable goal, and that a person's well-being and happiness depend fundamentally on obtaining consumer goods and material possessions. So you see there's a strong focus on materialism, on competition, having more and more and having more than the others, and a shift away from the important values like integrity and sharing and connection with nature. Now, because we feel that our happiness depends on buying more and more often, we start identifying with the objects that we own or that we desire to own. And that's why this illustration, I think, is absolutely brilliant, because it really shows how these different brands, they start to chisel into our brains and become associated with our identity. Now, all types of consumerism are causing huge destructions, of course, on the environment, because when we talk of consumerism, we talk about buying something, but that something has been produced, and not necessarily in a very ecologically sound way, and not necessarily because we need this something, but because we have been, taught basically to believe that these things are things that we need or that are desirable. Now, The question I'd like to ask here, and I think it's really important because many of us, especially in the West, don't think about who these terrible destructions, like the climate crisis particularly, who it will impact the most. Well, this is one of the things we talk very often about, climate justice and environmental justice. And what that means is that in most cases, it's usually the most vulnerable sections of society, and usually the most vulnerable countries, and within the most vulnerable countries, the most vulnerable sections of society, which means marginalized communities who live in drought-affected areas or in floodplains. And a lot of these people, they don't have access or cannot afford protection from the extreme weather phenomena that they're going to know. But even within Western countries, more, shall I just say, richer countries that have better infrastructure, what we find is that even in countries that are, more well off, that it's usually also the marginalized community that are affected the most. They are the ones who have pipelines going through their communities. They're the ones who have a sewage waste treatment plants that go in their community. They have not as much of a voice as those people who have more clout, shall we say. Now, the thing with climate justice is that we always say that it's so unjust, right? Because most of these communities are the ones who have had the least amount to do with our current crisis. So it's really the countries that have been consuming so much and using so much fossil fuels and really going to these great extremes of destroying our ecosystems and things like that, that are the ones who are going to be impacted the last. But these fires that we had last year in California and Australia has shown that nobody is immune. We are all vulnerable, and that we really all have to come together as a global community to understand that it's affecting all of us. Now, we've spoken about the problems, and now we're going to get into the fun stuff, right? Because it can get a little bit overwhelming when we talk about the problems. They seem to be so big and so huge. And so what can we do about it? Well, there are solutions. And so I'd really like you to just, in the chat box now, write in what are your ideas? What are the types of solutions that we can come up with? What can we think of? How can we think of creating solutions to these problems, or creating just a different way of living in the world? And I'll give you a couple of more seconds for this. And this is a mind map, and I love these mind maps because they sort of look like a brainstorming session where we talk about it. We say, well, we can do this, yeah, we do this, we can do this. And how about doing that? Okay, so now that you've had a little bit of time to write in some of your solutions, let's talk about number 1. Adopt a plant-based diet. So here we have 2 very, very important little citations. One is that 11,000 scientists, that was in 2019, in November in 2019, 11,000 scientists just declared a climate emergency and called for a global shift to a plant-based diet. And on the bottom was a report that came out of a 2018 study from the University of Oxford, and the recommendation was that veganism is the single biggest way to reduce our environmental impact on the planet. The study the University of Oxford finds. Now, this is probably the easiest thing that we can do. We can all do. It's really, really easy because we all eat 3 times a day. It's something that we all can do. And you don't have to ask for permission from, a government or whatever. Of course, if you're a minor, you must have your parents' approval or your guardian's approval, and maybe you can bring them in with you and explain the science to them. But we can all make these decisions for ourselves. We can go to the supermarket, if we go and buy our supermarket, and buy plant-based options of whatever they have. So it's not something that we have to wait. We can do it today, as soon as our next meal. Now, what's really important here, and before I go on, I just want to take 1 second for those of you who might not really know the difference between plant-based and vegan. So basically, plant-based is the diet that vegans eat. Veganism is not necessarily a diet, but it is a moral philosophy. And underneath veganism is basically a question that we ask ourselves. I'm vegan. And it's the question that I asked myself when I realized that I could be healthy and, and live a very fine life and not and minimize the harm that I was doing to other beings. So basically, vegan is a moral standpoint, a moral philosophy, saying that we can live fine lives, healthy lives, without breeding and killing animals. That's really what that's underneath it all. So veganism is the moral standpoint. Vegans eat a plant-based diet. And when we talk about what we need as a dietary shift, we talk about a plant-based diet. Now, why is it so important? Well, when we look at it this way, we've spoken about why animal agriculture is so destructive, right, to our environment. But we think of how absolutely inefficient it is, really rationally. So animal agriculture currently takes up 80% of our land and 1/4 of all of our freshwater resources and more than 1/3 of all of our crop production. But yet it gives us less than 1/5 of the world's calories and 1/3 of the world's protein supply. Now that is, it's on a rational scale, without even thinking about being good to animals or something. On a rational scale, it's really, really important to understand just the resources that we are using and we are depleting because we are raising animals to eat. Now, one of the things that happens when we adopt a plant-based diet is that a lot of scientists have estimated that we would only need about 25% of the land that we're currently using to grow food for the entire human population on the planet if we're all eating plants instead of animals. So in other words, once we no longer breed animals into existence, we will free up tremendous amounts of land, and that is the main key to repairing our planet. Because imagine what would happen if instead of deforestation, we put all of our energies into reforestation or afforestation. Reforestation is planting trees on a place where there used to be forests, and afforestation is planting trees on a place that hasn't had forests in a while, even though the entire earth used to be covered in forests. So imagine what would happen if instead of destroying, we were actually planting millions and millions of trees. Imagine if we started planting millions and millions of fruit trees. Imagine if we did what's showed here, which is called rewilding. Now, rewilding is simply keeping human hands away from large parcels of land and letting nature do what she knows how to do better than we humans can ever do, which means creating ecosystems, building habitats, and biodiversity. And that brings us to number 2. So this is something else that we can do. Again, very simple. We can grow gardens and we can plant trees. Now, growing gardens is, we don't have to have a huge patch of land or a backyard. We can even just have access to our own, just a balcony. Or even if we don't have a balcony, a sunny window where we can grow our own herbs, for example. They can be grown in any available space while using different types of creative ideas, recycled material, no chemicals, very little investment. You know what you're eating. And even if you're just growing your own, able to grow just a small part of what you're eating, it gives you a great sense of satisfaction. It gets you outside. It's very, very, very community-based. So what's really great with gardens is it can be this idea of something we can do in a family. We can do it in our schools. We can do it in communities. We have community gardens. We can do this as a way of gathering together and growing things, growing life. And as we know, trees are nature's way of capturing CO2, and they release oxygen. They rejuvenate the soil. They create homes for all types of biodiversity. So if we're able to do all of these little things, even small things, right? Growing a small garden, planting some trees, growing a garden if you have the land with trees, getting people involved, talking about how just wonderful it is to put your hands in the soil and to feel the life that's coming out of it. Number 3 is very, very, very easy, and again, so easy to implement. And it just is saying no to packaging. And as most of us live in places where we have the stores where they have bulk, that we can buy in bulk. So we don't need to buy all of the foods that are wrapped up with all of these other plastics and carton boards and styrofoams and whatever they happen to be, that ultimately land up either in landfills, in the ocean. They end up polluting ourselves, the marine life, and just they drown out basically all of the natural resources that we have. So saying no to packaging, buying in bulk, very easy. Number 4 is becoming a zero waste warrior. And I like to use that word, right? A warrior, because it really is, it means that we're proud of not just doing the R's, right? Refusing, reducing, reusing, but rethinking about our consumption, about being a consumer, what it means. It's about our relationship with things and our relationship with the earth and all of the people and other animals who live on this earth with us. And number 5 is reducing our carbon footprint, right? So this, of course, means, if you have a car, if you're able to have a car, you drive less, or you take public transportation. If you're able to take a bicycle, using a bicycle, which is just so much, it has to be safe, of course, but it's much better for us as well, and it's much better for our atmosphere, for emissions. It means also petitioning your cities to put in bicycle lanes, to put in public transport, to make sure that we have a role to play on a greater collective level. And last but not least, and this I guess is, we're coming to the end now, it's basically to become a conscious and a compassionate global citizen. And the two most important ways to do that is to live your consciousness and your compassion every day. And by making these different steps that we've just spoken about, and many others that, of course, you will be able to talk about after when we talk about questions and answers, and to educate others about the same thing. That's called activism. Activism is basically bringing other people's attention, awareness to these problems, and bringing their awareness to the solutions. That's called activism. Now, one of the phrases that I always like to talk about is to act local and to think global. So make a difference in our own community. And if you're in school, it can be in your school. It can be, trying to get more plant-based meals in school canteens. It can be, there's so many different ways, but on a local level, it's really, really good to get the word out and to try and find changes that are easy to implement, but on a bigger scale. And I think that here, the two signs that we see here that I think are really, really important. The first one, of course, on the left is there is no planet B, which means that we have to make it work here on this planet because there isn't another one. This is our home. Our home is planet Earth. And it is our one and only home. And we want to live in a beautiful home. We want a home that is not just beautiful, but that is livable. And the second one is on the right, which is you are never too small to make a difference. We all have a role to play. We all have the enthusiasm of wanting to have a better tomorrow. And last but not least, I'd like you to all remember to cultivate joy. Joy is something that comes from inside. We don't need things to have joy. We need to have an appreciation just of the miraculousness that is this planet and all of the inhabitants of our planet. And when I start getting a little bit cranky, I take a walk with my dog, who you see her here. Her name is Uma. And she reminds me how easy it is to cultivate joy by just paying attention to the small but very, very authentic things in life. And with that, I want to thank you all very much. And I'm going to get out of here and hand it over to Madhavi. And let me go here. And here we are. So I'd like Madhavi actually to, Madhavi, you're on mute. And I'd like first Madhavi is going to speak about Jeeva Bhavana, and then Aprajita will speak about the Save movement. And then we can get some questions.
Yeah, hi, I'm Madhavi. I'm one of the co-founders of Jeeva Bhavana. And we're thrilled to see you all watch the webinar. And we're really grateful you all have spared your time to be with us for this important discussion. So to tell you a little bit about our organization, it was founded by Sanjeev, Julie, and myself about a year ago. And we are a solutions-based environmental NGO based in Pune, India. And our primary objective is to study the devastating impacts of animal agriculture on the Indian environment, health, and economy so that we can find solutions to mitigate the climate crisis and to assist farmers to transition from animal-based agricultural practices to natural plant-based agricultural practices so that they are compensated well for the hard work they do to feed us. And with this, we can respect all life on earth and allow it to thrive. As an organization, we have been conducting webinars for various cross sections of the Indian population, along with talks, workshops, and film screenings to educate the public about the benefits of plant-based nutrition for their own health and the environment. And this will also help us generate more demand for plant-based food from the farmers and create a positive feedback loop for them. Jiva Bhavana means cultivating life, and we take the concept of ahimsa very seriously and strive to apply it in our life daily because it is a firm conviction that a healthy and thriving planet can be achieved only when animals are no longer enslaved, exploited, and slaughtered. Thank you. Over to you, Prajita.
Thank you so much, Madhavi. Um, yeah. So, hi everyone. And yeah, so I would like to brief you about Animal Save Movement. So, Animal Save Movement started in December 2010 with the inception of Toronto Pig Safe. We have over 1,000 chapters in 72 countries today, and we bear witness to farmed animals during vigils at the slaughterhouses to give them comfort, bring attention to their plight, and hope to move public consciousness towards compassion for their unnecessary suffering. Our primary goal is to promote veganism and activism and to join other groups to grow together in unity. Our scope of activist is not limited to animal vigils, but also includes vegan street outreach, film screenings, corporate campaigns and marches, and global events like Wake of World. We have three branches, which are the first Animal Save Movement, which has branches all across the world. And the second is Health Save Movement, which promotes a nutritious, whole food, plant based diet to overcome the global chronic health crisis and enhance food justice and security. So, and our third is Climate Save Movement, which is a grassroots movement to prevent the climate crisis by ending animal agriculture. As we witness the greatest threat to humans and animals in the form of current climate chaos. We also have the Youth Climate Save Movement, which is the first youth-led movement focusing on animal agriculture and its negative impacts on the planet. And in Youth Climate Save, we have 72 chapters in 22 countries. and we welcome youth as well as you young adults up to the age of 25 years to join us. And here, so this is a brief introduction about us, and I'll. So with this short introduction, we now open to the session of question and answer. So if you have any question, you can write in the comment section, and we have amazing environmentalists over here who will answer it. So yeah, over to you, audience.
So we already have one question here from Avantika. She asks, how can we motivate people to switch to a plant-based diet?
That's a good question, and I think that that is the reason that we gave this webinar. We really want what Jeeva Bhavana really is trying to do. We are a vegan environmental organization, so we are all ethical vegans. But we really are focused on trying to get the environmentalists, because there's so many environmentalists who don't want to look at the facts, right? That animal agriculture is the leading cause of not just climate change, but also environmental degradation and pandemics and the rest. So we talk about plant-based much more than we talk about veganism, just because it's it's really the plant-based food system, right? Even if to switch to plant-based diet, yeah. So I think the important thing to do is to arm yourself with facts. That is that is the most important thing, is to make sure that you know what you're talking about when you talk to people. Have some facts on it. We have, if you look at jeevabhavana.org, we have resource pages. We have also a lot of information on our website. We have a lot of resources that you can look into. And if you're more interested, of course, you can get in touch with us. We'll be very, very happy to do a webinar for your friends or for your school or whatever it is. So I think that it's really important to know the facts and to talk to people rationally about what's going on. And that's really about all we can do. We can't force people, of course, but we can give people rational explanations for why we are seeing what we're seeing now, and also rational solutions on how to solve those problems. Sanjeev, Madhavi, Aprajita, anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, this is the greatest problem we are facing right now, and there are many problems which can be connected to our consumption of animals, say world hunger. So, whenever the opportunity arises, one should take it and speak about how animal agriculture is connected to these problems. Um, yeah, that's what I would like to tell.
Um, Sanjeev, anything to add? Shall we go to the next question?
Yeah, someone has asked, does going vegan benefit the climate? So,
Well, I hope you've watched the webinar, because that is really what we, one of the main things that can help. And going vegan in and of itself is not the only thing we can do, but it is probably the most important thing that we can do. There's so many other things, of course. We must switch over to renewable energy. We must actually reduce the energy that we're using, and not just switching over, but we have to reduce our energy, our great energy way of life, shall we say. And of course, we have to stop using plastics and these things. So there are a number of things, but really going vegan is probably the most important step that a person can take, and the easiest thing that a person can take, because it's, as I said, of course, again, if you're living still with your family, you're not unfortunately able to make your own decisions about these things in many cases, but there are so many alternatives now that it shouldn't be too difficult. I don't know, I don't live with you, but it shouldn't be too difficult to do, but it really is easy, and it's the most important thing. Anything to add? Aprajita is left. Anything to add?
Yeah. Yeah, so let's go to the next comment. Mr. Avinash says that plant-based diet can only be good if the farmers grow in the natural way. At present, majority of the vegetables that enter the urban market is grown using herbicides because of labor shortage and chemical fertilizers and then pesticides, which is true, and that is exactly what our organization is working on. And if you see the entire picture, it's the farmers which are the most affected by our habit pattern of consuming foods, animal-based foods, and we have to make this transition. And leaving aside chemicals is very important.
I think that's a very, very important question, and it's true that we are so. Of course, it's animal contaminants, of course, that are very, very detrimental to soil health and things like that. But it's also, as we said, the chemical inputs that we are putting in that is just wreaking havoc, not only on our own bodies, right, but also on our soils and the ecosystems and things like that. And we have to remember that so much of chemical agriculture is being used in order to grow the fodder or the feed to feed so many animals, right? So once we take the animals out of the picture, it doesn't solve all of the problems against, but when we take all of these animals out of the picture, we don't need nearly as much land, and we don't need to grow these very, very high intensive crops to feed this huge number of animals every day, because they live, we kill them much too young. We shouldn't kill them at all, but they eat a lot of food, they drink a lot of water. So it would be, of course, I'm talking about a hypothetical, much easier to get rid of the whole chemical industrial agriculture. Once we get this huge portion, which is what we are growing and how we are growing crops to feed animals, out of the picture. But we have to get away from chemicals. 100%, 1000% true.
Yeah, and so the next one is, in perspective, what kind of obstacles you might have faced in putting climate crisis and animal agriculture in mainstream activism?
I think all three of us can talk about that, because
Yes.
there's a lot of pushback. There's definitely a lot of pushback, because when you speak about animal agriculture, what you're talking about people is, you're saying to people, if you want to be coherent, right, about what you're talking about, then it just is logical. It just is like the next step to stop eating animal products and animals yourself. And most people don't want to. So that is one of the reasons that a lot of people, including so many environmentalists, they draw the line there and they say it's fossil fuels, it's fossil fuels, it's fossil fuels. Now, we're not saying that fossil fuels are not a problem, and we're not saying that we shouldn't move to an economy, a world without fossil fuels. But what we are saying is that it's not the only problem, and it's probably not even the most pressing problem. As we said about before, methane, one of the good things about methane is that if we stop animal agriculture, there's no more methane. Whereas that's it. And methane has a half-life. Within 10 years, there's no more methane at all in the atmosphere. Whereas carbon dioxide is there for tens, if not hundreds of years. So the carbon dioxide that we are emitting will stay in the atmosphere. So even if we stop all carbon dioxide, it's still going to be warming up because of everything we put in. Whereas if we stop the methane, that's a huge chunk of all of that warming potential that is no longer going to be in the atmosphere. So, but people have a really hard time, because it's much easier to blame the other person, right? Saying, okay, I need my energy, I need my car, I need my this, I need my that. So just change the energy source and I'm good, right? Then saying, well, maybe if I made some changes in my own diet, my own habits, that might actually have an impact. Not easy for people to hear that.
And as Julie said, we have experienced a lot of pushback, but that doesn't stop us from continuously writing letters to people in position who are influencers and the media and institutions, where we're continuously, persistently sharing this information or even correcting them sometimes with their facts. And yeah, we intend to do this despite everything against us. Yeah. How to create awareness about cruelty in the dairy industry?
Uh, yeah. Uh, are you the person who wrote this? You're maybe talking about in India. Are you? Is this someone who's from India
I
who's
don't
asking
know. I don't
this?
know whether the person is from
No.
India. Yeah, but I guess it's for the person. I think it's all out now. It's for the people to perceive the right information and see reality as it is. But it shouldn't stop us from persistently speaking about it, and just go on as we would uh, want to speak for the animals. Yeah.
Hmm.
I think I can just give one facts which it is easily available on anywhere on the Google. So India happens to be the largest exporter of beef in the world, and it also happens to be the largest number of having largest number of cattle. So you can just link the two and figure out where is the other side of the coin of the dairy industry, and that will tell you how cruel it is. And there cannot be more harder facts than that.
If we don't eat meat, the natural life cycle will be disturbed. Uh,
I'm
well,
not sure if
what
I
will
understand that question.
if we
No,
don't
no,
eat
that's
meat?
fine. Yeah, yeah.
Will
He's
the
saying
natural
the natural life cycle is already disturbed by us eating a whole lot of meat which is not meant for the human bodies. We have already disturbed the natural cycle, so we should go back to the natural cycle of not eating something which is not suiting our body and also harming the environment. Eating meat is for carnivores who are there, in the wild, and that's the natural cycle.
And let's not forget that the animals that we eat, or who we exploit for their eggs or the milk, there are very very few of them. I mean, maybe there are a couple on still in India that are naturally bred, right? But most of these are artificially. Hi, Amy. Most of these are artificially inseminated, these animals. And as I said, they're almost like carbon copies of one another because of the artificial insemination. So there's nothing natural about that whatsoever. Nothing. This is like totally fabricated. And plus, with what most of these animals end up eating, and the antibiotics and all of the other types of drugs that they have to eat in order to stay in these confined conditions and not get totally sick and go crazy. They are eating toxins, and so if we eat these products afterwards, we are eating the same toxins that they're eating. It's in their animal. It's not like the hunters and gatherers, right, or the gatherers and hunters, as I like to say, of so many years ago, who I'm not saying it was good or it's bad, but this was part of our natural evolution, right, when we started hunting. But these animals, they didn't have, they were not artificially inseminated. They were part of a cycle. Uh, you know, I'm not in any way condoning hunting today, but I'm just saying that the difference between what we are eating today and what we kind of try and believe that we're still eating is absolutely hugely different. So we're thrilled to have Amy with us today, who's coming from
Los Angeles.
California, Los Angeles, California. Yeah,
Hello.
and yeah, and Amy also can answer lots of questions about the Save movement and more of the vegan activism questions if there are as well. So we're really happy that you're with us today. Thank you, Amy, for coming.
Happy to be here.
So,
Okay, and I'll go to the next question. Can we permanently stop pandemics by going vegan? This is a very good question.
no, I mean, and we cannot permanently stop climate change or environmental by going vegan. Let's not think, it's like this one solution, but we certainly can. It's a huge part of the solution, right? So, as we know, as I stated, about 70% of pandemics are actually zoonotic diseases. So that means that their source is in animals. They started in animals. Wild animals sometimes, like what we found in the wet market in Wuhan, China. But we forget about swine flu, and we forget about, Ebola, and even AIDS. And actually, something that is really, really interesting is that almost all of the diseases childhood diseases, right? Like measles and chicken pox and whooping cough and scarlet fever, even the common cold, they've been with us for hundreds and hundreds of years, but they started off in animals. Almost all of these diseases that we are knowing today, that everyone that we just sort of take for granted, right? Measles, you get your vaccination or whatever it is. They all started off as an animal-sourced virus that jumped over to humans, all of them. So the short answer is no, we cannot get rid of pandemics, but we certainly can lessen the chance of zoonotic diseases actually wreaking havoc as COVID has, for example.
And there is a very interesting comment saying that herbicides and nitrate fertilizers are known carcinogens. Well, if you're saying with reference to shifting to a plant-based diet, consumption of animal-based food is way more harmful to us in terms of carcinogens as compared to plants. So there is science about it. One can read up on the net about how even if it is not organic food or natural food, plant-based food we're getting right now, but it's still best beneficial as compared to plant-based foods.
And just the fact that I think he's right in saying that if you're going to eat chemical-based plants, it's going to be dangerous. But I think we should realize the fact that exactly the same plants and whatever food is going to be grown chemically is going to the animals someone is going to eat them. So in addition to those carcinogens which is going to come from these fertilizers, you will also have antibiotics, you will have hormones and viruses which only come through animals. Viruses don't come through plants. So you have these additional items which are going to come to the body. So we need to shift to a more natural, plant-based, wholesome way of eating. That's the only way out, to get rid of all the diseases.
Yeah.
Let me see if there are more questions. There are a lot of comments which we should read. What are the future initiatives of Jeeva Bhavana that we can all volunteer, participate, and amplify and collaborate? This is by Climate Save India. Yes. So,
go ahead, Madhavi.
Yeah. So we are all looking out for collaboration because we are a new organization and we are a very small team. So, something like having repeated webinars consistently to different audience in India and outside the country, we are very happy to do it. And we can discuss about other ways to collaborate so that we can amplify what we are doing, which is really the need of the hour. Yeah.
Yeah, take a look at our webpage, our website, find us on Facebook. If you want to get involved, even if you're not in India, but if you want to get involved, we'd love to have you as a volunteer. There's so much to do, and of course, we're not enough people doing it. But anything you do, and whether it's with us or whether it's with Climate Save or any other group, remember that there are more and more people who are doing really, really great things. And one of the things that I think is really great as well is to go to be, I don't sometimes use the word infiltrate, but to go into different groups that are not necessarily yet educated about this particular problem of animal agriculture, and be the one to talk to them about it. And you don't have to be crazy about it, but you can bring it up. because a lot of people don't know. We have to remember that the idea of fossil fuels and CO2 from fossil fuels has gotten the whole, like 99.9% of the narrative in the last 30 years or so. And so when you start talking about something else, people have a really hard time hearing it because it's just not in their view. They haven't seen it before, you know. So it's a really, really great thing to go and to talk to other people who might not be aware of it. And again, to educate yourself. It's one of the most important things that we can do to be helpful to everyone is to educate ourselves, to find out the right information, to put networking out there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think there's a young girl whose father is attending this, and she's asking, and she's also attending, I guess, how we can reduce methane that's already in the atmosphere. So thank you for asking the question. We just spoke about how the animal agriculture is responsible for releasing so much of methane in the atmosphere. It's primarily responsible for that. So if we would stop eating animals and encourage people around us to do the same, we would contribute in a big way to reduce the methane emissions.
Yeah, that's the beauty of methane, if I can say it that way. The beauty of methane is that it's very short-lived.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sanjeev.
Yeah, that's what you said. Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So that's the whole thing. Is there's also another there's other sources of anthropogenic. Anthropogenic means basically that humans are the cause of methane. There is methane, for example, when we extract fossil fuels. There's methane that is produced as well. So there's all different types of ways that methane is produced. But as we said, about 40% is produced by animal agriculture. So already, if we're able to take that huge chunk of methane out of the system, then we have a much greater chance of, and it just goes away. It gets out of the environment, the atmosphere, very, very, very quickly.
I think her specific question was how do we reduce which is already there in the planet. So like Julie said, it has a short lifetime, and after that it again becomes carbon dioxide, so which is there. So one of the ways is to have more trees, stop deforestation, and grow more plants and this thing. So it will do the carbon sequestration, which is going to come out from the methane. Yeah.
So Naman is asking, is ahimsa milk cruelty free? No way. There is no such thing as ahimsa milk. The milk is finally for the calf and for nobody else. It is meant for the calf. It is not meant for humans. So there is no way there is anything about like cruelty-free milk.
And it's not even good for us. It's not good for humans.
It's not even good for us.
It's made for its baby. I think it's a wonderful doctor. His name is Dr. Neil Bernard, who said, or no, it's Dr. Michael Clapper, who said, dairy milk is a baby calf growth formula. That's all it is. Just like human milk is a baby human's growth formula. And a baby rat's milk is a rat's formula. So milk is just, dairy milk, cow's milk is not at all suitable for human consumption. And so aside from the fact that as well, if there's just no such thing as ahimsa milk, why even think of drinking it,
Exactly. And there are
milk
a lot
is cruelty, Milk is cruelty in liquid form, absolutely.
Yeah. There are a lot of good comments here who are saying that this is very important information. It should be taught in schools, but unfortunately, there is a lot of resistance. So yes, there is a lot of resistance, but we see the picture changing since the past 2 years. We are working on this, and I think again and again, I'll say the same thing. It's the perseverance which will help us change the picture and get people more on our side. And we'd appreciate more suggestions for having more webinars in schools and other such public platforms. So all of you, anybody has suggestions, please get in touch with us, as well as the institution or whichever public platform, where you would like us to have a webinar. We'll be more than happy to do it.
And we can also have webinars we do, that are more specific if you want it to be, more about like the environmental breakdown or things like that. But it's just really important to have an overview, right? To be able to know, first of all, that this climate crisis that we are living through is real, and that there are ways that we can actually mitigate it. I think it's really, really important to be empowered with the truth, because it's only by knowing the truth can we really make steps to change the way things are actually going now. We don't want to, we're not unpowerful. I'm thinking of the word impuissant. Can't think of the word. Impotent. I'm sorry. I live in France. I'm sorry, and sometimes I can't get the English words out. But we're not impotent. We definitely have a lot of power ourselves, but also when we have a community and we can speak up and try and get communities together to make the right decisions, you know, for not just the animals, not just for us, but for the life on the planet.
Yeah. And yes, somebody has made a very important comment that once we go vegan, we'll be able to free up land for forestation. Yes, that is the objective of our work as well, to free up land for deforestation, which will be a good channel to sequester carbon from the atmosphere.
Yeah, Avinash, what you're saying about breeding, yeah, the animals that are here, we have, I'm not sure if how many people know this, but there are approximately 65 billion land animals that are slaughtered every year for food. And when it comes to the ocean, there's so many that we can't count them. They count them in tons because there's just so many. And as I said, you know, about 40% of that is bycatch, so that's not even counted really. So it kind of blows your mind in terms of the sheer numbers. And nearly all of these 65, 70 billion animals have been artificially bred. They have not, you know, they're not just mother and father bull decide, you know, mother bull cow and father bull decide to have a baby. That's not how it goes at all any longer. So obviously, as we stop eating animals and as the demand goes down, there will be fewer and fewer animals that will be bred into existence, and eventually we can imagine a world with you know, very, very few domesticated animals. But what's really important to remember as well, if you're interested in getting involved, is to find ways to pressure governments as well. It's really important because of the subsidies, and this is everywhere in the world. There's major subsidies that go toward animal agriculture in all different stages, you know, all different types of animal agriculture. And that could be even despite the fact there seems to be a decrease in the demand, right? So, for example, in the United States, the demand for dairy, cows, you know, milk, has decreased tremendously. And what the government, because they give so much money to the dairy industry, they basically buy it and stockpile it. So there's these just, I don't even know the numbers because it's just so huge amounts. I mean, tons and tons, you know, thousands and thousands of tons of dried milk, of cheese, of milk, all these different types of things that are in these warehouses that end up, of course, their shelf life is not very long anyway. And they just basically are there because we've decided to give money to these industries, despite the fact that no one is eating them. So the whole subsidy thing has to be dismantled, and we have to make the personal changes ourselves and ask other people to make these changes and educate them why making these changes are so important. But we also have to find ways of changing more, like groups, for example, as I said, in schools, trying to get schools to offer plant-based options. You know, so even in a municipality, to be able to make sure that there are plant-based options in, you know, city canteens or mess halls or whatever they're called. All of these types of things are also extremely, extremely important, and that we can all take care, we can all really be part of at our own levels, you know, of influence.
Yeah.
Amy, is there something that you wanted to talk about a bit? I'd love to. How can I join the Animal Save movement? How do you like that?
Yeah.
Perfect.
To go off what you were just saying, Julie, on what we can do as individuals, For all of the youth, all of the young adults out there listening right now, if they want to get involved, we have an entire branch of Animal Save movement called Youth Climate Save, and they can join Youth Climate Save. And even if that only means running an Instagram account to share this information that somebody might see and go, wow, I never knew this. And I didn't know how much power I had every day by choosing to eat plants instead of animals. I am making a huge effect against climate change and against water pollution and against all kinds of terrible things that are happening right now because of global animal agriculture. So if the young adults out there want to join Youth Climate Save, we have some kids as young as 11. Their parents, of course, are helping them, so the parents need to be on board. But running an Instagram account is not terribly hard to start. So it's an easy way to get involved and become a part of this huge movement of youth.
Amy, are you frozen?
Yeah, looks like.
Okay.
That was a very important
Amy,
point made by.
yeah. Yeah, you really don't well, when Amy comes back, well, she'll come back with the, but it's true. And really, I mean, people are, social media is the way to go, right? So it's really, really great to, if you have a social media presence, to get this information out as well, to find ways to make sure that people get the point, you know, and to get involved in different groups.
What are your thoughts on plant-based meats and companies like Beyond Meat in the US? Okay, so this is for Amy. Are you there? Amy left.
Amy,
okay, you can take it, Julie. What are your thoughts on plant-based meats and companies like Beyond Meat?
You know, I think it's yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on that because it might be a little bit it might just take us away a little bit from this. Basically, I mean, I haven't been eating meat for a long time, so I don't particularly care about there being a substitute because I don't want to have that feeling in my mouth any longer. You know, I just don't want that. But I think that a lot of these meat alternatives and dairy alternatives are very, very important for people who really still want to have the taste and the consistency in their palate, and they don't want to give that up, but at the same time they want to either reduce or stop their consumption of animal products. So if this can help people on their, to eat less meat or to actually stop eating meat or stop eating animal products, I think it's great. I think it's wonderful. In terms of the health benefits, that's another story. The problem, of course, that we come across with a lot of these things is the environmental impact, not because all of these things are much more environmentally friendly than the animal products that they are trying to replace. So they all use greatly, reduced quantities of water compared to the real animal product or, land use. All of these things are much, much more improved, of course, if we use the plant-based option. But the problem is, of course, is that they are in packaging and they are transported in, all different ways. And that is something that we are not really very happy with. So what we really want to see is people who are going to take up the mission of having biodegradable packaging. Because these things are with us and they'll be with us for a long time, but we don't want to have that plastic or whatever else it is that that they are inside of. So if any of you are looking for a good business opportunity, there you go. Personally, I'm not interested in these products, but I do think that they definitely are very helpful and prove to people that you don't have to compromise on taste. You don't you can do the right thing and you don't have to compromise on taste.
Is there a way of making organically grown fruits and vegetables cheaper so that everyone can afford it? Yeah.
That's
So,
again a question of supply and demand. I'll just tell you in my experience, because I live in France and I've been eating organic basically forever. It's a long time, you can see by my gray hair. Organic used to be 2, 3, 4 times more expensive than the conventional stuff that you get wherever else. And now it's nearly the same price. So this is really a question of, people showing, going out and getting out and buying these organic things to make sure that the demand is there. That is really, really important. Is to support it at the beginning. Of course, it might be more expensive, but as the demand is greater, this is one of the things that we are doing with Jeeva Bhavana, with our program for farmers, is that we are supporting them by helping them in making the right decision, but also creating a consumer base that will buy these products, and then creating this positive feedback loop, as we like to say.
also, I would like to add that we attach a lot of, or look at the weigh in the prices a lot when we have to make the choice. But the benefits you get when you consume organic foods, uh, we cut on our health costs when we eating the right food, which is more beneficial for our body. And one more thing, like when you see the effort, if we try to grow something on our own in our own garden or something, and we see the effort that goes in or the challenges that we face, I think that's when we learn to respect the effort that the farmer puts into growing our food, and we value it, and we understand why it is priced the way it is. Yeah.
I think somewhere I can also see the benefits of cutting down on animal agriculture. Then you free up more lands for growing. You will have more lands for growing plants, and then you can have you can grow more and more organic plants, which then will automatically become cheaper because now you have more land to grow this. So the current problem is also linked to the whole lot of land getting diverted to growing crops for animals, and lesser land for maybe growing our plants, vegetables and plants, and that they have to grow more, so they put chemicals. So you free up this land and you get more land for growing organic vegetables, and then the cost comes down. So that's a huge benefit of cutting down. I mean, not just cutting down, absolutely stopping animal agriculture. So it's all linked if you look at it.
What are your thoughts on B12 consumption? Yeah,
I
Julie, you want
mean,
to say?
it's just basically if you stop eating animal products, you have to have a supplement. That's all. It's as simple as that. It's the only supplement. It's not much. Most animals today are supplemented as well. So when we are eating animal products, we're getting the B12, but that they didn't get naturally the way that they did so many years ago when our soils had B12. B12 is basically a bacteria that is assimilated in our digestive system as it becomes B12 in our digestive system. But it used to occur. These bacteria used to occur, naturally in like soil and contaminated water, things like that, stagnant water. We've just found it one plant source of B12, but it's anecdotal. We don't have to talk about it. So basically, there's no more B12 really in the soils any longer. The bacteria for the B12 is. So now most of the B12 that the pharmaceutical companies produce every year goes to the animals that we end up eating. And when we eat their bodies, we eat the B12 that they were supplemented. Vegans just say, okay, I'll just take the supplement myself. Really easy. Problem solved.
Yeah, so for
But it's important to take it.
suggestions,
It's really important to take it. Don't forget it.
yeah. And Naman, you can start with the supplements, and there seem to be traditional foods, but we have really lost all that knowledge now, which do provide. But we have to really dig in and see and consult the right nutritionist who will give us advice on that.
Yeah, and I see in the comment, Naman. So it would be really great. There are some really, really good plant-based doctors in India as well who can give you some advice nutritionally. But omegas are, there are definitely, for example, ground flaxseed and hemp seed and things like that. There's some really, really good plant-based sources of omegas, omega 3s and 6. people talk about that often. They say about, the fish, and we need to have fish because that's the only source. But there are other sources of the different omegas. And also don't forget that fish, they might have omegas, but they also have mercury, they also have cholesterol, they also have all of the other stuff that microplastics now, nanoplastics. So when we eat as far down on the food chain as possible, then we are getting more non-adulterated nutritional value for basically what we're eating. So that's just a very general rule, but I'm not a nutritionist. None of us are here. So when you have specific, if you decide to go to a plant-based diet or vegan diet, we really suggest that you do it seriously, and that you can find out there's some really, really great plant-based doctors who give nutritional advice even for free, lots of really good resources. On Jeeva Bhavana's resource page, you can find a few websites that will help you with that. And that, if it is something that is important for you, then of course, if you find that you are having a deficiency in something or something like that, then you just find the right answers to it, because for every nutritional need that we have, human beings have, whether it's the macro or the micronutrients, there is a plant-based way of getting it, except for the B12 for the moment. Take a supplement. So it's been an hour and a half. I mean, I'm fine. It's not late for me. If there are more questions, we certainly can get to it. If not, we can.
We can end.
We can end it now. If there's anything that anyone wants us to, nutritional yeast. Nutritional yeast is good. If there's anything else, I eat a lot of algae, actually. I'm a big algae, because also it's really important to have iodine, and that's one of the few things you can get it from is algae. So algae is really, really fantastic. And so you're basically eating what the fish are eating and what they are getting their nutrition, right? Except for their carnivorous fish. But basically what we're doing is we're cutting out the middle animal, right? We are eating the source of the food, what the animals themselves would eat, or the types of nutrition that comes from the plants that animals eventually eat, whether they're land animals or marine animals.
So I have an announcement to make. I mean, those who found this webinar interesting, we'd appreciate you recommend your friends and family to watch it tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. IST. And
it's 9
that
p.m.
would be
9 p.m. on the west coast of the United States, I believe.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah, 9 p.m.
So this would be a good way to help us amplify the movement in a way. Okay, Amy has joined in. Hi, Amy.
Oh, yeah, you're back. Hi, great. There you are.
I'm so sorry about that.
That's okay.
Our internet just shut down. So I am working off of my phone.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm planning to join Animal Safe Movement and Youth Climate Safe. What's the process? So if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yes. So you can actually just send us a message through any of the social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook. You can send us an email through our websites and ask how you get involved. And that could be joining a chapter that gave for the adults, or any of the Youth Climate Save chapters that already exist. Or if there isn't a chapter in your area, we would be thrilled for you to start your own, and we can help you with that process as well.
Okie doke. So I think if we don't have anything else that, if there's anyone who has a very pressing question that they wanted to ask, you can write it right into the comments right now. And if not, we can call it a day or an evening or a morning, wherever we happen to be on the planet. So yeah, that's it. 9 p.m. PST, that Pacific Standard Time, and 9:30 a.m. in India tomorrow, the 18th.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, very, very happy to have had this opportunity. And some of you will see you tomorrow. If not, please let your family and friends know that we're going to be doing this in just a few hours. And get in contact with all of us, some of us, and just keep doing what you're doing. Spread the word. And we're happy to be here.
Thank you.
We're glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. Bye.